All right, hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. Here's Melanie Gottlieb, your moderator.
Good afternoon. I'm Melanie Gottlieb, Deputy Director of ACRO, and I'd like to welcome you this afternoon to today's webinar presentation on solving the International Institutional Code issue, a case study. Presenting today we have Matt Bemis, Associate Registrar at the University of Southern California, and Michael Sessa, President and CEO of PESC, the Post-Secondary Education Standards Council. Before we get started, I'd like to add a quick note on logistics. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the session. Please type your questions in the chat box and I will read them aloud for the presenters to address. You can type the questions at any time during the presentation, but I will hold them until the end. And now we'll get started. Registrars, data managers, and professionals who work in international credential evaluation and transfer credit are familiar with the challenges of maintaining institution tables for non-U.S. institutions. With no standard institution code, saving school data in information systems is impossible unless you independently create your own code schema. This creates inconsistent or mismatched country-specific code sets and historical data, accidental code duplication, and makes the digital transfer between systems or institutions nearly impossible. Today we're going to discuss a specific case study at USC. So I'm going to go through the agenda. We've just done welcome and introductions. Next we will go look at a University of Southern California case study in history. We'll look at the current state of code indexing. We'll look at the plan and vision of the PESC GEO CODE, a proof of concept. Then we'll talk about how you can participate, and then we will have time for Q&A. Now I would like to turn over the mic to Matt Bemis.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody. I'm looking at the participant list and I see several familiar names. Thank you very much for joining the webinar and supporting this. It's comforting to know there's some friends out there, so thank you. What I'm going to talk about really is a story of a strong need for process improvement on our campus, and this relates directly to international students and the international population that attends USC. Several years ago, we made a decision to improve the way in which we evaluate and record international degree verifications. Specifically, the Registrar's Office was tasked with gathering data from students, gathering documents from students, and verifying their credentials and recording their credentials. And about 2010, that came to the Registrar's Office. It migrated from admissions. And what we learned is we weren't really very good at doing the work. And so we sought out a better way to provide that service. Just as a footnote, USC continues to be one of the largest provider of post-secondary education to the international community. About 25% of our students are international based, so it's a sizable population. The majority of those students must have prior degrees verified, the majority are at the master's level. And what that means is that USC had to have the expertise in-house in order to evaluate those credentials. And the pitch here to our leaders was that we were really concerned that we were not providing an adequate job of reviewing these documents. We wouldn't know a fraudulent document from a legitimate document in most cases. And ultimately, the pitch to outsource this was successful when we illustrated that really no one's happy with the services we were providing. The students weren't happy with the services, the departments that we serviced weren't happy, and the length of time to produce these evaluation results was just, it was unacceptable. I put a picture, I tried to find a picture that illustrates just of what it looks like on Graduate International Orientation Day a few years ago. What would happen is we'd have 1,000 students show up on campus. They would meet with their advisors, and then they were told to come to our office to bring their one one-of-a-kind documents to our office so that we could verify their credentials. The reality is they had to drop off their credentials. We had to be the custodians of those credentials. And ultimately, several months later, students would have to pick up those credentials after we provided the evaluation. It was just something that was unsustainable, and with our enrollment numbers continuing to increase each year, we had to figure out a better way to do it. In making a decision to outsource, sorry, seem to have lost my screen. Getting back to the screen here. Well, Melanie, can you advance the slide for me? I don't seem to be seeing this right now. So the decisions that were made along the way, USC reached out to several players within the space to figure out really what we should be doing. And there we go, we're back here. Sorry about that, guys. So we reached out to the players in the space to figure out, we wanted to make an informed decision on how to outsource this. Some of the folks we reached out to were some of the ACRO resources, the IES services. We also reached out to a few NACES members. NACES is the National Association of Credential Evaluation Services. Members of that agency, association rather, are in the business of providing degree evaluation credentials for international students. And we also reached out to our admissions staff. And in particular, our admissions staff had some experience with some of the NACES members and had recommendations. Ultimately, we based our decision on that input and made a decision to go with the International Education Research Foundation. I'm going to use IERF from this point forward. And there are several reasons for IERF. One of them was their reputation within the NACES Association. Also, their reputation within our admissions operations. Some of our staff in our admissions operations at the time were former IRF employees, and also their proximity to USC. It just so happens they are just a light rail train ride away. So that was helpful in developing that relationship. But most importantly, when we were having early conversations with them, we pitched the idea of not only providing their evaluation results electronically, but through machine-readable transmissions. And I just want to stop there for a minute to talk about what I mean by electronic data. IRF was in the practice of sending their evaluation results electronically through PDFs. What we asked them to consider was sending their results through EDI or XML data transmissions so that there would be machine-readable data. And their willingness to engage in that decision was, or engage in that practice was a compelling reason for us to move forward with them. I just want to make it clear that it was not we didn't ask for a promise, we asked for a pledge that they would consider sending us data electronically. So with that in place, we were up and running with IRF. Our students were having their documents verified. We were receiving PDFs. And after about 6 months of that, we reached out to put together a plan that would develop the EDI transmissions. I will say IRF went into this with a little bit of trepidation. They were sanguine on the prospects of this being successful. But at the end of the day, they trusted us. They said, listen, this sounds like it could be a win-win for us. And they were willing to engage in the project. So we developed a project plan with them. We introduced them to the world of EDI, electronic data interchange. We read them in on what is the speedy server, how do you go about registering, and we basically showed them samples of EDI files, and we figured out how their evaluation results would report within the existing framework of EDI. We did choose EDI because USC has been an EDI shop for about since 2009, so it worked for us. Although some schools do accept XML as well, we chose EDI and they developed EDI. And finally, the one piece that they needed from us was an internal index for each of the schools that we have in our student information system for international schools. Like most schools, like most student information systems, you have to store data with an index value. So what we did is we provided IRF with 1,300 indices for current schools where we see data for international degree verification. And we gave that then to develop the file. So, the project in review. Over about 45 days and 3 phone calls, we were able to educate IERF on EDI, its file structure, what they need, what their files would look like, and I want to stress that over 3 phone calls, we were able to successfully help them understand exactly what they would be doing. That coupled with the information available on the Speedy server, there are great resources to get started. There's best practices implementation guides. That information, but the learning curve is very quick. We helped them register with the UT Austin server. At the time, the Speedy server was housed in at UT Austin. And they engaged in a programmer to actually build the file and send the file and how to process acknowledgments for files sent. Once we mapped that information, they basically used those 1,300 school codes that we sent them, that we created ourselves, as override institution identifiers, such that when we receive a file, an EDI file, it's recognized as it's from IERF, but the prior degree information is embedded in the EDI file degree segment with an override institution that identifies the school from which that student earned the credential. So very cool, and that basically integrated what we were doing already with other transcripts, EDI transcripts we've received from 4-year schools, domestic 4-year schools. And so 1,300 schools. Just to give you a sample of our index, I put 3 there just as information items. India 0345, France 0743, China 0010. Those all are indices that we created and we basically manufactured. We made up and assigned as values in our student information system. They have no meaning outside the USC world. If IERF wanted to send the same data for an institution, they would have to know at that receiving school what their internal index was. So that in itself is really what born the need for the discussion of an international code set that would meet the needs of the education community. I think I have a little bit of information here about kind of the manufactured school paradox. So we at USC, we are not uncommon in that we manufacture codes. We have about 2,000 manufactured codes in our system, made up codes so that we can index courses and prior degrees. And if you look at the 4,000 schools across North America, they're all doing that in some capacity if they are indexing this type of data. So essentially we have all these codes out there that really don't mean anything other than to each individual school. The other part of this is that even schools in the United States, North America, the standardized code sets that are available, I've listed them all there, those are all valid code sets issued by some agency or operation. But none of those code sets are complete, even for schools in North America. In fact, I think some of the ESIS and APAS are some indices used throughout the provinces of Canada. And so that's a great example of the need was to figure out a way that we could create an international index that would be open and sustainable. And this really led us to the group at PESC. And I'm going to let Michael Sessa talk about PESC and its operations and just why they were so instrumental in getting this project off the ground, conceived and off the ground. So project launch, we launched in 2013 after a couple months of testing, and essentially we were receiving machine-readable data, meaning that the file was coming in, it would load in our student information system. IERF would get an acknowledgement that we received the transaction. We discontinued the practice of expecting PDF documents and all the overhead associated with printing those and indexing those in our image viewer. And at the end of the day, although IERF was sanguine on the prospects here, they quickly learned that this is a game changer. This would have a huge payoff for them in the transmission of results. And really with that success, they really wanted to say, how can we do this for other schools? And so one option was to have IERF use our code set for every other school, or we would engage in the practice of creating a global ID. And when I say international ID as well, I mean for U.S. institutions as well. In fact, the United States are one of the code sets that are indexed and available in our service. So successful EDI transmissions. You can see that volume there that we continue to grow. And what that volume means is we used to do 2,400 manual evaluations, meaning receive the documents, be the custodian of those documents, record, return. All of those transactions now, by and large, there are some that are manually reviewed, but by and large drop into our student information system. They come in every day. They're loaded every day. The registration holds are released. The prior degrees are indexed in the student record. The degrees are shown in our commencement program. It's all very much a seamless operation that has been, it's been a big payday for us. I did ask Susan Badul, who's the executive director of IRF, to say a few words regarding her experience or her memory of how we developed this, and this is what she had to say. With Matt's support as well as his expertise at our disposal, we were able to determine the workflow internally, spec out the programming, and conduct the testing within a few months. The main challenge was coordinating the process with various parties, including our offsite programmer, who was on the East Coast, and the Speedy server, which was in Austin at the time. However, beyond this, the implementation was not difficult. It truly raised our service levels as we were able to standardize the information required by USC and have these details transmitted instantly. It has significantly impacted our ability to serve both USC, the institution, and each individual student who has applied to us. I will add to this that every party in the transactions here are much happier with the service provided, and there are no bottlenecks at all. So it's and kudos to IRF for being somewhat of a pioneer here, taking a leap of faith. There was a lot of work in getting this done on their side. They spent resources that they really weren't sure they were going to get back, and so they should be commended on stepping up as an innovator in this space. And this is where I hand it off to Michael to talk about this collision that brought about this project and brought about where we are today.
Wonderful, and welcome everybody, and thank you, Melanie and Matt, and also to Kes and Michael on the ACRO staff for supporting us and hosting this webinar. It's wonderful to be with you. I see, I was looking down the list, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces and to see folks from the Speedy Committee, past and present, and also I'm going to do a special shout out to our friends in Canada because it is Canadian Thanksgiving. It's the week of Thanksgiving there, so I see Kathy and Doug, and also to our friends in Europe. I see Janina because it's very late out there, and I'm just thrilled that we have such great attendance. So I'm going to pick up where Matt left off and talk about the intersection of this idea that started brewing. PESC had looked at this idea several years back and studied it. We work closely with ACRO Speedy on a, if not a daily basis, a weekly basis. PESC and ACRO are both signatories with Groningen. The Groningen Declaration Network has been tremendous in its outreach, and ACRO sits on that board of directors. And with PESC forming our Canadian PESC user group to reach out to all the stakeholders in Canada, and then bringing in other organizations that also cross these paths, specifically ECE and IERF, which are both playing such a vital role. It became sort of looking at the picture on the wall. It became evident that something needed to be done, and so that's where PESC can step in and use our strength to support this type of idea. And when we did, we had additional solid representation. I mentioned ACRO. We also had Academy One and the Groningen Declaration Network, and Lucian, the National Student Clearinghouse, Parchment, Ontario University Application Center, and that was at our initial meeting, and many of those organizations now sit on what's the steering committee, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But really, what really came about from this group was to put some parameters around it. There was so much interest in it. And one of the first things PESC had to realize is this cannot be about PESC, and we cannot put barriers in place for this type of solution. So there was a strength in talking to the group of supporters I just mentioned, and immediately some important parameters were raised, that it has to be open and it needs to be free. And with that in mind, we looked at organizations that are partners with us that have that same mission and that same disposition as a 501c3, and ACRO and the Groningen Declaration Network emerged clearly. So PESC partnered with both, and now the initiative, which is really driven by a work group, Matt and IERF and all the groups I just mentioned, we formed the work group that's doing all the work under the hood here. And so working with ACRO and GDN really made sense because we needed to continue that momentum. And it has been really successful, so I want to thank both of those organizations. I also want to mention that in case there is any issue during the session or for folks that are interested in looking at it, the presentation will be posted on the PESC website after the session. So let's jump right back in. So knowing all of this, let's set a clear mission. Establish a free, open, and standardized online directory of education organization codes and identifiers for use by institutions and stakeholders worldwide. Kind of pie in the sky, but that's the type of problem we think we needed to solve, and that was agreed upon. So we launched that at the 2016 Data Summit, one of PESC's, and we also agreed that it would be hosted and managed under PESC. Governance also emerged as a primary issue. Free of charge also emerged as a primary issue. And one of the first tasks became to crosswalk or map between some of the existing global codes and native institution codes. And as I mentioned, partnered with organizations that would also contribute, expand the mission, and organizations that see the benefit. And what is that benefit? To jump right in, what Matt was talking about was we needed a proof of concept. And that proof of concept is, what's the idea? Okay, we have the general idea, but what's the real idea? Form a new 7-digit code. We know some folks say, well, you're adding another code. Yes, the issue is hopefully we form one more code that could be the code of all codes, if you will, because we cannot continue to keep adding codes under this business case, because we're only allowing the problem to continue. So that was the idea, is to develop a 7-digit code, 2 digits based on the ISO country code, and 5 digits based on an alphanumeric code. And Matt Bemis will be happy to tell you what the math is on the possible permutations of those numbers. But what we did was then to jump right in and say, okay, we have, with all of our outreach, we have a number of code sets, or could get a number of code sets. And so that's what we did. And so through the efforts of the work group, we've indexed, I forgot to add in Antarctica. So we have Antarctica, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, India, New Zealand, Poland, the People's Republic of China, the province of Taiwan, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. So those are there right now. You can go to the PESC website and click on it and open it and see how they've been indexed by country and sort them. One important idea is to remember that it's just index-based right now. It's not automated, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. Also, just some important things to understand, because as with any idea, well, what are all the parameters and the what-ifs? So we came up with 12. We're open to amending these, improving these, adding on to them, so that other folks can understand and also contribute. So provide a unique index value. Geocode, the proof of concept, 2 digits plus 5 digits. Minimum requirements, name and location. Minimum status, active or inactive. Process for additions and edits, we have that. No implied validity, accreditation, or official status. We are not making any judgment about what this institution or the code represents. All we're saying is it's a destination for data and data exchange, just like sort of the post office. They don't say you're this type of business or that type of business. I have something to deliver to coordinates, and that's what we're trying to be. Additional guiding principles: no reuse of the codes, include diploma mills, and Matt can talk about this a little bit more, and this might come up in the Q&A, and this is also why we talk about it up front. This was an idea we vetted through discussions with the Groningen Declaration Network and a number of organizations, and through IERF, and through ECE, and through ACRO. And the issue, again, is if we go back to the prior guiding principles, we're not making a judgment. And if that is the case, then we are better off listing a known diploma mill because we are unsure of what diploma mills might mean and what that language might mean. So what we've decided to do was to indicate, provide an indication that something might be known as a diploma mill, so that we are educating each other with the best information we have. However, we're not making a judgment call. Focus on the data sources, and we also looked at Wikipedia, and we've vetted Wikipedia. We've had many discussions about can we trust Wikipedia, and because of the process we've set up behind with the work group, we don't really trust anybody. That's why we're trying to do this and pull a circle of trust with all of our partners to say geocode is something you can trust, and Wikipedia will be a primary source of data that informs the PESC geocode. We talked about it being web service based and search enhancements planned, and we also talked about adding the geocode indicator, the code itself, to PESC approved standards, and Matt has already taken the lead in that. And to work and partner with the ACRO Speedy Committee on a 5-year rolling review and maintenance program, so that we are ensuring that, like any idea, that we have a process in place that looks at existing data and makes sure that the data is as current as we can make it. I'm not going to read all of these word for word, but some of the benefits that popped out include improved data quality and integrity, decreased risk of fraud and abuse, faster benefits delivery of data, free service based on open architecture, can be recognized universally, and as we just talked about, some are already using it. So we have a real clear case, and let's switch it back over to Matt to continue sort of wrapping up some of the ideas and give you more of the idea of why this is such an important pilot for us. So Matt, take over.
Absolutely. So this really dovetail into the pilot, the success of the pilot, and where we are. I just want to backtrack a bit. When I say EDI, electronic data interchange, just so folks are clear on the call, this is a file that is in a standardized format that if I send it to your school and your school does a mapping with EDI, you know what the data is and you can load it into your system. EDI has been around since the mid-90s. There are hundreds of schools actively exchanging EDI across North America, and it's just a vehicle to transmit data in a standardized open source format. So thank you for that question, Melanie. So where are we with this geocode pilot? So we've now indexed many countries, as Michael has, many schools within many countries, and the next step was to have IERF basically use that index and convert from those USC values that we provided to the geocode values. And in turn, USC has re-indexed its conversion from global to its internal indices within their systems, within our systems rather. So what we've asked IERF to do is to go in and as we roll out each of these countries, as we roll out each of these countries, we ask them to go check out the schools where they're sending us evaluations from, and re-index in their system so that they're sending using the geocode as the override institution. And to date, they have more than 700 schools re-indexed, and those 700 schools are now coming through using the geocodes. They continue to look at the countries as we publish them and convert their known school transaction IDs, indices within their systems. We expect more than 2,700 EDI transmissions this year, and a majority of those will be from those 700 schools that they have indexed. It's not it's not an accident that we started with the schools that are the most populous within USC. We did target those, but the user community that was available to really get these things up and running was it was really it was a team effort. In addition to ACRO and PESC, there are some agencies such as CDSL, which is an agency within India, provided data. CHESIX, which is an agency within China, provided data. There's folks from the European University Foundation that will provide data. They've promised 27 EU countries and schools within those countries. ACRO has been very active with reaching out to ministries of education to see what we can gather. The other part of building these lists has been a grassroots campaign, in that when we couldn't find data from countries we were targeting, we reached out to alternate sources, and some of those sources were Wikipedia. We were surprised at the level of completeness that Wikipedia provided for universities. It was really remarkable. And it's not that just we used Wikipedia data directly. We had work studies at USC vet those listings to verify the authenticity of the schools. And that's been a big part for kind of the blank spaces where we couldn't get data. And again, the Canadian PESC group also provided information. It was interesting, even in their group, it was difficult to amass all of the schools in Canada across the provinces because no one list existed completely. So with this pilot, we've been successful with exchanging electronic data, and it's been a game changer for us, really. The services that had so much overhead in them are now, no one remembers all of the trouble and angst we had over providing that service. Susan Badul, I did ask her for kind of a summary of her experience here, and this is what she said. Being part of this project has great significance for us. When dealing with institutions of study on a global level, there are added layers of complexity, from similarities in names that potentially confuse one school for another, to variations found in translations or even spellings due to transliteration. Developing standardized geocodes will help minimize exactly this and facilitate accuracy and speed in the work we all do. So again, kudos to IRF for stepping up. So a wide vetting of index methodology. I mentioned Wikipedia. I mentioned ministries of education. Some of our internal lists like OPID or SIEV or FICE, those are all things we could use to gather data. The guiding principles that we built over the last 18 months, those did not emerge immediately. Those were through discussions within the work groups. We also built a way for anyone using this data to report omissions to the data or corrections or duplication. So we actually have a service out there on the PESC website that folks can do. Continued publication of additional countries. We're working on them. We're getting them out as quickly as we can. We hope that this fall we will have all of the Americas indexed. We will have South Korea indexed. We'll have Russia indexed, in addition to the other 27 countries from the EU. So pretty ambitious, but we think we're on track to do that. I do want to make the statement just of what is this geocode really? This geocode means something to you if you are exchanging electronic data. If you are not exchanging electronic data, probably not so much. But this code could be used as an underpinning for any international exchange network or directory or credential repository. So that really has broad application, we think. How can you get involved? We want you to use the list, contribute to the list. Michael mentioned there's a 5-year review for each country. We're going to calendar that. We're going to reach out to ACRO work groups, PESC work groups, others to partner with reviewing those lists for accuracy, adding to schools. When schools change names, how do we do that? How do we index that? How do we report that? So this is very much built for the community, by the community, and of the community. So we're all in this, and I see we have 78 people on this call, and we hope you'll be partners with us on this. Additions and corrections. These forms didn't come out very well on the PowerPoint, but basically this allows any user to come in to say, I don't see this school reporting here. They give us some information about who they are, the school, the geographic location of the school, and essentially we take that information in. We do a vetting. We look at it. We verify that it's not already there or not under another name, and ultimately report back to the person what we did with that request. In some cases, it's just naming conventions of schools, and it really is school is there. In others, there are omissions. These lists are not complete, but they are it's starter data, if you will. These are the known institutions that we could easily, or in some cases not easily, make available. But that form is active and alive. And governance, I'm going to turn over to Michael. He can talk about kind of the PESC governance practice and where we are with that.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. And just a couple of things first. I know there might be some questions about why PESC or how is this free. Well, over the past couple of years, the PESC Board of Directors, which are PESC members, clarified that PESC should really serve as an incubator of good ideas and foster those good ideas and do as much as possible to support good ideas, because there are a number of other ideas out there and that may not garner our attention. So we try to do everything we can. As being a 501c3, our mission calls not only to benefit the members, but to benefit society. So this is one of those that we believe benefits society. That is why our steering committee, which is now made up of those organizations I've talked about, one of the parameters they said is free and open. It's a very difficult business model, but that those are the parameters to make not only the service itself open and free to the public, but to make the work group itself. So if you want to join the work group, you're able to do that. And so if you want to be someone that's helping to build the lists and do the scrubbing of the data, or doing the outreach to the new countries, or help in any way, we meet on a regular schedule with that steering committee. It is why we opened it also to and partner with ACRO and the Groningen Declaration Network. And we are trying to hold quarterly conference calls like this webinar, which really just gets the word out better than PESC can, because PESC is small, and we appreciate the folks that dialed in today. So you can look up this information online. We have two places on the PESC website. One is just GEO code, if you're just interested in the information itself, and under groups is work group information. And let me just leave you with a couple of ideas and a couple of thoughts based on everything we've talked about, is that what we want to look at is not only to incubate the good ideas like this and encourage those that take those really hard steps sometimes, like USC and IERF, that PESC is looking to advance this idea to the next level. And that next level is to expand the definition of the code, or bring in other use cases to expand the definition of what the types of codes we contain in the list, but to focus on automated machine-to-machine capabilities. In a recent conversation I had with a colleague at a meeting, Jeff Grant from Capella University, we were discussing the recent uptick in the use and dominance of scanned paper. And Jeff and I were talking about our addiction to paper. And his comment was, and I told him I was going to say this and give him credit for it, sometimes we get better at the wrong thing. So what PESC wants to do is try to encourage ideas that might be supporting automation, whether that's through EDI or XML or JSON or XML PDF or some type of directory service like this, which we're looking to automate. So I also wanted to thank the other folks that helped make this possible. PESC sponsors, Credential Solutions, National Student Clearinghouse, Oracle, Parchment, all of PESC members, and also mention that ECE is coming on as a supporter of this initiative as a sponsor, so that we can now, PESC can dedicate some of its funding to the automation and the technology. So with that, I'll wrap up and hand it back over to Matt and Melanie.
Okay, I think we're at the
Thank you.
questions.
Yeah, thank you, Matt and Michael. I have a few questions here that are queued up. The first question is specific. Why have you focused on universities and not other post-secondary educational institutions?
That's a really good question. We've had this conversation at most of our meetings with regard to in scope and what's going to be on this index. And at the end of the day, what we said was we're going to start with universities because that's the use case we have in front of us. But we also know that there's no reason we cannot include two-year colleges. There's no reason we cannot include secondary schools. There's no reason we can't include any entity that may have a credential or where a student has a learning instance that could be reported. And so part of the geocode structure is the length of the code and the alphanumeric value of the code such that the number is big enough to where any conceivable entities within any country, we would not exhaust that number. But it's completely reasonable that a use case could come along tomorrow where high school data is going to be transmitted, and we would want a geocode for all the high schools in the world. But the code was built to handle that. We started somewhere, and the somewhere was universities, and the use case was sending credentials from those universities.
And I'll jump in and just add that through the many discussions we had at the work group level, what really started to emerge is, are we student-centric and institution-centric, and are we clear that it is institution-centric, or are we looking at this from a learner-centric perspective? Because there are many different types of organizations that do education, learning, and training. And therefore, again, if we're not going to be judgmental, should we therefore sort of elevate it to a more umbrella term where all education institutions, learning organizations, teaching and learning could fit under? So we built a big house, and that really is how that discussion emerged. However, Matt and with USC and IERF decided to figure out how to match this initiative to a specific issue they were having in their business process and run with a business case. And so, yes, it can be used for that instance, but that's sort of the background to that discussion. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Michael and Matt. The next question I have is a question about automation, and I think Michael talked a little bit about it, but will this directory be automated?
Michael, I'll let you field that question.
Sure. That is follows in the same vein of thinking as the prior discussions we had. So right now, you can click on the PESC website and see the directory as it stands right now. It's in Google Docs. So we're using Google as our platform right now. But as we had mentioned, it is our intention to build something automated through an automated directory, and that's where we're doing more outreach so that we can build up more momentum to bring it to that next level of automation. So it's on our radar screen, and it is one of those next steps. So yes.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to jump ahead to a question that is going on right now. So I just want to, could one of you clarify again the structure of the geocode? There seems to be a lot of questions around the 2-digit ISO code plus the rest of the code. Could you just re-explain the structure of the code and how that was determined?
Sure. So we looked at the existing ISO codes that are available. There are 2-character country codes, there are 3-character, there are 4-character. And so when we looked at this, and again, through our work groups, we got great feedback, and ultimately we decided that we think the 2-character code would meet our need. That said, the remaining 5 digits are alphanumeric, meaning they could be 0 through 9 and A through Z, but that will start with a numeric value, and that it would not be case sensitive. So if you look at if you do a kind of a 34 factorial 4, you get to a very large number. Over 1 million individual instances are available for any one country code. So we did that to make sure we weren't, we would never be in the practice of reusing a geocode. Once a geocode is assigned, it's not reassigned ever. It may be sunsetted for necessary reasons, but it would never be reassigned. So that 34, if you think of 34 factorial 4, that's ones and I's being the same value and zeros and O's being the same value, lowercase, uppercase, not case sensitive. You get to 34 unique values, and multiplied over 4 instances, that's like 1.3 million and change. So that's why we chose that structure.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt.
Sure.
Another question is related specifically to the USC use case. So if you could, Matt, address a question that is around the process of the evaluation. If USC sends the electronic copy of their transcript to IERF, who pays the evaluation fee, USC or the applicant? Could you just clarify what that process is there?
I can, and if you allow me, I'll give you the genesis and where we are today. When we first decided to outsource this, we did not get support from our administration on this. And in particular, we did not get our support on passing the cost of the evaluation on to the student. That didn't sit well. And so in our initial efforts, the Registrars office decided to pay the fee for the evaluation. And at that time, we were receiving the documents and couriering them to IERF. And so over time, we changed the practice to pass that cost on to the student because it was a necessary cost if they're studying here or elsewhere. And we were successful with that. But we did start with the process of USC paying that fee. We got out of the business of being custodians simply because it was unmanageable. And so at some point, we transitioned this to where students who were admitted were told, you need to go to this web page and follow these instructions to have your credentials evaluated. So actually, the student interacts with IERF directly. The IERF has its own landing page for USC. The instructions are clear. They submit their materials through the prescribed methods. And as part of that EDI transmission, we actually have a local ID for that student that the student has already provided IERF, and that's how we match our records. But essentially, the student goes to IERF. IERF does its evaluation. The necessary pieces of the evaluation are in the EDI file. It's mapped to our student information system, and it's loaded.
Thank you, Matt. Another sort of technical and process question that folks are asking, can you talk about how this relates to actual course articulation? There's some questions around how this impacts course articulation and whether this is a replacement or something that merely supports it.
Yeah, that's a great question, because when we started this, the pilot was looking at prior degree credentials. We did not get down to course level data. And that is an important distinction here, in that in the EDI structure, one has the ability to transmit course level data and in addition to other data, prior degree data or earned degree credentials. So our pilot focused on prior degree credentials. It did not focus on course level, and one of the reasons is because most of our volume is for prior degree credential evaluation. So we do have international students at the undergraduate level who do negotiate the services with IERF to evaluate and translate coursework, but that right now is not being transmitted through EDI. That is done old school PDF. And to be fair, we are in discussions with IERF on what course level data would mean. It's a little bit different for their level of service and how they report it than it is for, say, students completing coursework at USC and transferring it to UCLA. But we're not doing course level data yet.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Another question has to do with next couple of questions has to do with the code table structure and some maintenance questions. First question is, for these geocodes, how do you accommodate Indian institutions where students attend one institution but the degree is issued by the parent college or university? Did you create a hierarchy? How are you managing that?
You know, that is a really good question, and the reason I mentioned CDSL, which stands for Central Depository Services Limited, they're an organization with India. They helped us understand that. There are actually, if you look at the geocodes, there are about 760 indices for India, if I remember correctly. So the reporting of the degrees go through those 760 universities. The actual where those students completed the courses does not. And so when we were getting grade sheets or mark sheets for students who studied in India, it would be from those 760 schools. Even in the grade sheets and marks, it was not recognized as one of the colleges, one of the many colleges that may report up to the University of Mumbai. So following our standard practice of what we did, we asked the question, of those 760, does that meet our needs for reporting based on what we're doing now? And the answer was yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Another question has to do with the changing nature of politics and geography. What if a country code changes? For example, a country is divided or recognized as two separate countries, or is it assigned a new ISO code, etc.? Have we thought about those kinds of issues?
Yes, we have. Remember that I said that a geocode would never be reused. So if California became its own state tomorrow, and we needed to index all of the schools in California, we would probably look at our current indexing and location and say, okay, here is the new ISO code, and probably we would mark those as inactive for our geocode and put put Y, that these now exist as this value. It doesn't mean those two geocodes would not continue to exist, and if we receive data from any of those two codes, it would still be matched. But yeah, there's going to be instances like that where institutions change names, or they are bought, or they are merged. We are looking at the actual data structure, and that's the work that Michael's talking about that ECE is doing. The reality is, right now, at a minimum, what do you need to create a geocode? We need to know the school name, and we need to know the geographic location. But there's all kinds of other data that could be within those sets. And hierarchical data is a discussion. Known as is a discussion. Formerly known as is a discussion. If you look at the codes, if you look at the columns rather that are in there right now, you'll see some of that. It's just not complete.
And I'll add on there, Matt. Maintenance is one of the first items we talked about. You know, many of us have good ideas, but it's not only just having the good idea, it's being able to support the good idea. And that's where the strength of ACRO Speedy and PESC come in, because we have standing, permanent, long-term committees that do this type of work, this detailed, granular level mapping, updating, all that really detailed work that they then roll up to provide whether they're standards or crosswalks or good information that we can all use. So we plan a rolling process so that we can ensure that this remains usable and sustainable. That, I think, is the key word there, is sustainable. We want to make sure this is long-term, because we need to solve this little, I say this is a little issue, but this is a small issue that has tremendous consequences and adds on to cost and inefficiencies. And, you know, again, we're not trying to boil the oceans here. So we really hope folks, you know, can participate somehow. So thank you.
Thank you both. It looks like I have one final question I don't know if, Matt, you can answer this or not. The question is, can a student request an evaluation through IERF and have that sent to a specific school using this process? Can you talk a little bit about the pilot and maybe refer someone to IERF, contact there?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I know IERF was working with NYU, and one of the conversations was with Susan Badul. You should start the process early on about receiving EDI data. The reality is they have a method of sending PDF results. They have a method of sending EDI results, but you have to be an EDI shop in order to consume that, or it's not going to do you much value. So, you know, with my Speedy hat on as part of the Speedy committee, I'm always selling EDI. I'm always selling XML, and in that regard, that's you know, this was as much driven by my association with Speedy as it was with USC, because if you're exchanging data electronically, everybody wins. So if a school said, hey, I want to start exchanging EDI data, I want IERF to send my results through EDI, that school can reach out to any member of the Speedy committee, and we can help you get set up. We can show you what you need to do to get registered. We can give you sample files. We can test with you, so that when you're ready, IERF can send the data electronically.
Thank you, Matt. And just to follow up with that, Speedy is one of the many ACRO resources that are available in order to help institutions get to that point where they can exchange data digitally. This process has been around for quite a long time, more than 20 years, and institutions do have some challenges getting to that implementation point. And so I would encourage you to reach out to ACRO in order to have that help and find those resources, because we do have quite a bit available through the Speedy Committee, through our Technology and Transfer Conference, and also through ACRO Consulting. It looks as though that is the final question. And so I would like to just wrap up by saying thank you very much to both Matt and Michael for joining us today. This has been a really interesting conversation, and we're excited to see how this project evolves. A couple of other announcements I'd like to share. Next week, on October 18th, we'll be joined by members Seth Kamen and Stephen Handel to discuss ACRO's recent initiatives in the transfer area and to share with you our new guidance for institutions on student transfer. You can register for that free webinar through our website at acro.org. Also later this month, ACRO's 27th Annual Strategic Enrollment Management Conference will be held in Phoenix, Arizona from October 29th to November 1st. The SEM conference brings together a comprehensive lineup of experts, researchers, and practitioners who showcase both the core concepts that are the foundation of SEM as well as new and best practices. The ACRO SEM conference can help you to navigate the changing higher ed landscape and position you and your institution to maximize both student and institutional success. ACRO also offers additional professional development opportunities through webinars, online courses, and meetings throughout the year. For more information, please visit acro.org. This webinar will be recorded and available on our website, acro.org. You can check back by tomorrow. That will be up. And feel free for free. These are available for download and reviewing. Thank you very much for attending the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you again.